Be melon jolly, not melancholy. Summer is ripe for fun, and some Booster Juice bestsellers are back in season. Watermelon smoothies, including the refreshing Watermelon Wave, a berry burst of strawberries, raspberries, pomegranate, and vanilla frozen yogurt. And fan favorite, Watermelon Explosion, a refreshing burst of bananas, mangoes, and pineapple, both made with watermelon sorbet and probiotic yogurt. All of the watermelon, none of the seeds. Visit a Booster Juice near you today or download the Booster Rewards app.
1, 2, 3.
Hey, hi. Welcome to Someone Else's Movie, the podcast where an actor, writer, director, or nebulous industry figure gives a little love to a movie they didn't make. I'm Norm Wilner, senior film writer for Now Magazine, and this is the other thing I do. My guest this week is actor Jonas Chernick, whom you may have seen in projects as diverse as Degrassi: The Next Generation, The Border, and How to Plan an Orgy in a Small Town. He's also a screenwriter and producer, working with director Sean Garrity on My Awkward Sexual Adventure, Lucid, and Blood Pressure. Their latest collaboration, Borealis, casts Jonas as a father trying to outrun a gambling debt by taking his teenage daughter, played by Joey King, on a road trip to see the Northern Lights. It's opening the Brooklyn Film Festival this Friday, June 3rd, and it's available for rental or purchase on iTunes Canada right now. Jonas chose Swingers, the 1996 indie breakout that turned Jon Favreau and Vince Vaughn into stars virtually overnight, and set Doug Liman on the path to Go, The Bourne Identity, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, and Edge of Tomorrow. It's a delightful, quietly self-aware study of Los Angeles manhood, bouncing from one energized sequence to another while always making sure we're fully conscious of certain key differences between Favreau's lovable, deeply insecure Mikey and Vaughn's swaggering chatterbox Trent. And the fact that Favreau wrote it for himself might have something to do with Jonas picking it for the show. This is Someone Else's Movie.
I keep lists. I mean, you have to for your work, but most, I don't know how other film geeks do it, but I have my top 10 lists for every year dating back to like 1970. I should probably go back even further, but who has the time to do that now? So I pull out my top 10 list and I'm like, all right, let's see what I want. And you start looking at, oh, that would be really fun, or that would be really fun, or that would be really fun. And I had a short list. Are you curious to know what else is on the short list?
I'm trying not to interrupt.
I mean, so when So Pulp Fiction was on the short list, but I thought, there's no way I can do it. Somebody's already done it. I said, no?
No.
Damn.
Although someone did today, 3 hours ago, I was talking to somebody and he mentioned True Romance.
Oh, and True Romance was on my list
We have yet to have a Tarantino.
So that was on my list too. Say Anything was like a pivotal movie for me.
Sure.
The original Star Wars was like one of the most influential movies. Then I thought, what could I talk about for a long time? And when my eyes hit the Swingers, I thought, well, that's the one. Because A, it's unpretentious, and I love that about it. B, as the screenwriter in me, admires the simplicity and the personality of that screenplay, probably more than any other script that was on my short list.
Okay.
And then. And it just felt like it is a movie that I could talk about for days on end, because there's so much to it, and it's so personal to me, and where I was in my life when I saw it, and the context and how it sort of shaped the direction of my career, all that stuff. It sort of just drew me to Swingers. Yeah,
I totally see that. As soon as you picked it, as soon as I found out that was what you wanted to do, it's just like, oh, of course, because we're about the same age. We came up in that same window of independent film, the explosion of it, and I can totally see how you, who acts, that's grammatically horrible.
No, he who acts.
How a person who acts well. Yeah. How you yourself.
Yes.
I know your work. I know what you've written. I've seen what you've acted in. It's right in your sweet spot.
Yeah.
But it's also in your sweet spot because, in a weird retroactive way, you've created that sweet spot for yourself as a writer and actor.
And that didn't even occur to me when I picked it, and you're kind of blowing my mind right now, because now when I think about it, we were just talking about my sort of hyphenate sort of nature, why my, actor, writer, producer, the producer, writer being to support the acting.
Right.
And you got to think, I mean, I know from the, interviews and the oral histories and all that that's exactly what Jon Favreau was doing. He was, he wanted to do this for him and for his friends, and to give themselves this great project and give himself this platform to play this great character.
Yeah.
and all of that, and some of the tribulations he went through. I mean, the whole backstory about how they wouldn't let him direct it, and what that ended up, how that must have fueled his fire to become the director that he did. I all that's really interesting. But yeah, so I guess in fact, it not only is it about what interests me and do I connect with the subject matter, but I guess the structure of how it was made and who made it and how that all happened, it kind of fits nicely too. So
yeah, I mean, there is a long history in Hollywood, well, at least in Hollywood success stories, there's a long history of actors fighting to make the things that they wrote for themselves. And, Stallone with Rocky, and even like right around that same time, there were Damon and Affleck were developing Good Will Hunting at Miramax, and if you go further back, there's Kirk Douglas producing stuff for himself, and the studios like United Artists. All of it has always been about artists, primarily actors, trying to take control and do the things they wanted to do, and a system that is not only indifferent to that, but hostile.
Yeah, angry about it.
Yeah. What do you mean you want to do all these things? You can't wear all those hats, your head will fall off. Like,
exactly.
It's just this weird sense that every time it happens, it's a miracle that it got through.
I feel that, first of all, I feel that way about any movie getting made.
That's true, yeah.
That it's a succession of miracles. It's not just like, it's a miracle that we made the film. To get there, there's about 20 miracles that each one has to happen, has to occur in succession. But yeah, I often I sit back and I look at myself. So it's one thing for a star to do it.
Sure.
I think obviously a star has,
Yeah, Brad Pitt sets up a production company, things just kind of follow. He's doing great work, but he has the position to do that.
Favreau wasn't a star when he made Swingers. Not yet. I think he'd done Rudy. Right?
He was in stuff, but I don't think anybody would know him beyond that guy.
And Damon and Affleck were not stars, but they were kind of around, and you'd seen them. But so you think... I look at myself in Canada, having now made 4 films where I've had a hand in writing it, had a hand in producing it, and played the lead role, and most of them are budgeted fairly decent. The budgets are good. We're talking about $2 million. Mm-hmm. That's a lot of money. So I'm convincing people to give me $2 million so that I can make a movie that I wrote and that I'm going to be pretty much in every frame of. And I've done it 4 times, and I'm looking at, I'm not even, I don't consider myself even remotely close to the Canadian star system universe. I'm still this sort of fringe player, and I'm very happy with that. But I'm like, how is that possible? Who are these people, and why are they doing it? Yeah. And so I marvel at it, and then each time I embark on the next one, I'm thinking to myself, well, it's not going to happen again. I've fooled them enough. It's not going to, and then it does. Yeah. So yeah, it's
your latest one. You're opposite White House Down star Joey King.
Yes,
who is I've interviewed her, and I'm delighted to see her doing stuff that actually isn't safe. That she's going off and trying things.
Yes,
she's a smart kid, and I'm like, she's not even a kid anymore.
When did you? For which project did you interview her?
I think it was actually for. Oh no, it was for Oz the Great and Powerful.
Oz the Great and Powerful,
where she really just a voice for most of it. She has a tiny little appearance in the framing sequence, and she was already so far ahead of most people in their 20s on how films are made. She's just absorbed all this knowledge already.
Totally.
And she was aware of we were talking about the matching movement to dialogue and how she had to physically act it in the booth. She had to be she said something about how delicate her arm movements had to be because she didn't want to break her wrists while she was acting. She was pretending that she was fragile like a China doll. And in Borealis, it's that's a role that people would probably advise her not to take, I think, at this stage, because they want her to do studio stuff, and the fact that she's just going forward and making small movies. Same thing with Shailene Woodley in the the Divergent movies. Let her make other movies. Yeah. So good for her.
Yeah, good for her. I guess she, and I don't know about Shailene Woodley, but in Joey's case, it comes down to having a great mom. Mm-hmm. Having a mom that reads all the material and then the mom advises. So in Joey's case, I think her mom is very influential, and her mom read it and said, we got to do this in between Independence Day sequel and Going in Style, which she's doing, which is coming out next year with Morgan Freeman, Alan Arkin, Michael Caine. It's crazy. She's working on these giant movies, these giant people.
Right. But the smaller films are where you can actually show people that you can act.
That's right.
Because the bigger films don't generally have room for that.
It's true, and you know, not including like I think Ramona and Beezus, which was a long time ago. Joey hasn't had a lot of leads where she's the first number one on the call sheet, and kind of the movie centers around her. So I think that was very appealing for her. And you know, she also would work really hard on the blindness element, the gradual descent into blindness, because I think every actor kind of, you know, it's a cliche, but it's true. You love to do something that's.
Well, it's so far from you, right? I mean, that's the appeal of the acting gig.
Right. But it's also a little bit of that, is it Robert Downey Jr., that joke in Tropic Thunder about, you know, full, you know, go all the way. Or, you know, there's also a bit of that Rain Man, you know, you want to have that. But so I think, I know that's a bit crass, but I think there is an element of getting to show what you can do and feeling like that's a venue for it.
Right. So you've pulled this off. You've made Borealis, and it's it's finished.
It's done. It's out there. Yeah.
And so that's a $2 million picture that, you've convinced the world to create.
Convinced enough people to do it, but this time, you're right, I did have the ability to say, and we have Joey King, and we have Kevin Pollak, so, you know, we have enough people, I like that guy. Yeah.
Right. So Swingers doesn't have any of that. Like, Swingers is a bunch of unknowns.
Yeah. I think Heather Graham
had
done Drugstore Cowboy.
She was around. She'd done Boogie Nights, I think, already. Or was that the same year?
It might have been the same year. Yeah. When I remember when I saw it, thinking, it's Heather Graham from Drugstore Cowboy. Okay. That was the one that So when I look at it now, having made these films at that level, like Swingers, and I think, I bet you that was a big attachment for them. That having Heather Graham, even though she wasn't Meg Ryan at the time, was enough to say, you know, we got Heather Graham for this great final sequence. You know, that would have helped. But you were right. These guys had less than nothing. Yeah.
And out of it comes the kind of movie that you can make when there is nothing to lose. Like, they really have... There is no floor for them.
Nope.
They're working with nothing. They've got the... I'm always amazed that in a point where Tarantino films, the knockoffs had already started to dominate. I mean, 2 Days in the Valley was around, and Guy Ritchie was doing... But they were everywhere right at that moment. And Trainspotting had already come out for that other side of it, the dialogue-driven character piece that's also a genre film.
Right.
And here is this movie that you could sort of classify as, it's a talking movie.
Yeah.
Because those were popular.
Yeah.
But it's so weirdly distinct, and, like, I think the only other thing... I was trying to compare it to something at the time, and I couldn't, because the only other thing you could kind of compare it to was The Larry Sanders Show, and that doesn't work. That's not a comparison that stands. But they're both about cringing and the desperation of the masculine male ego-id thing.
Diner,
a
little bit.
Actually.
I mean, a Diner was 12 years earlier.
Yeah, but you can package it in your head as being about your friends and
male friendship and sort of that hierarchy of, you know, I mean, the code of Swingers that gets you in the heart is that, you know, as much as they're trying to get laid and do all these things, that the male friendship thing supersedes all of that.
Right.
So in those moments, you know, there's that great moment where they're in the trailer. They finally picked up these girls in Vegas, and they're in the trailer, and Vince Vaughn is literally about to have sex with this girl, and Mikey calls him out, you know, and I need you, we gotta go, and he drops everything. And he just drops everything to be there for his buddy, to have that pep talk on the side of the highway. And but I know what you're saying. There's very little that you can compare it to, and it is so distinct. And I think that was the selling point. That was what got me hooked. That was what got people hooked in the first 10 minutes. Is the way they talked, because it wasn't just a bunch of guys talking. They had a language.
Yeah, it's very similar to, in a weird way, it is similar to Trainspotting, which made Miramax perfect to market this, even if they sort of did it against their will.
Sure.
And I mean, when it played TIFF that year, I remember it being, it wasn't dismissed exactly, but until we saw it, everybody just thought it was going to be a thing that just made it into the festival. There was this really weird sense of, there was no excitement around it, there was no buzz around it. It was just this movie that was part of, at the time, Alliance Releasing's lineup. They were this was a movie also coming to the festival, and there were bigger films that year.
Stuffed in with the
it's just like, and this is coming to, I think it was in Contemporary World Cinema. It was just, it was thrown in to our eyes. It just landed on the list of other films. And it wasn't pushed up, it wasn't touted.
Right, it wasn't highlighted.
Yeah.
Did you see it industry screening or a public screening?
I saw it at a press screening
Okay.
underneath the old Famous Players building in that terrible little screening room, and it played.
Yeah, I'm
30
sure.
people, and we all loved it.
Because it sold, that screening is where it sold to Miramax. Because my two best friends saw it either the next day or the day after
Right.
at the first public screening.
Okay.
And they announced to the audience that Miramax just bought the movie. And my friends, I remember my friends saying, first of all, they said, you got to see this movie. You're going to get to, because these guys who made the movie were there, and they were at the front, and they were freaking out as they introduced the movie, and the place went nuts when they announced that we just sold the movie to you know.
Yeah, definitely by the time Favreau was doing interviews,
Yeah.
he was part of the Miramax, like the film was part of the Miramax family.
Right.
Because we met very briefly on the press day as I was being ushered through the room.
The
to do
TIFF
something
press
else.
day?
Yeah,
Oh.
we didn't actually get to, I didn't talk to him properly on an interview footing until Chef. But we met, we bumped into each other, and it's just like, all I could think of was, oh wow, you're the guy who made that movie,
Yeah.
came out of you.
Yeah.
And he was just really, I think he was kind of overwhelmed. He was just dealing with a bunch of things at once.
Sure.
And there were people swarming around, and I just said, oh, hey, I really liked your movie. And he's like, thanks. And we just moved on to our separate engagements. But And that happens at the festival all the time. But he looked like he didn't know what was going to happen next. Like, literally from second to second, he was uncertain of what the day was going to bring.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I can't even imagine. He was like living that dream, right?
Yeah. And spawned, accidentally, an entire culture of television and cinema that I can't stand. Like Entourage and all that stuff.
That's
Swingers,
funny. You're right. I mean,
Yeah.
I've never thought
Oh,
about
straight
Entourage
from
as
there,
as a bastard child. Or,
Yeah,
you
like the
know,
mutant bro culture
mutant.
version of it.
Absolutely, yeah, and completely missing the mark on the heart and the authenticity of what makes swingers special. When you watch those guys in Entourage, you're just they do not feel like actual friends. They don't have the it all just feels such artifice.
Yeah, it lacks the commentary really, or the insight, or even the humanity of
It
what
lacks the
Favreau's
heart.
doing.
Yeah, it lacks the simplicity in the heart, and and the world they're in is, I guess, the opposite world to. I mean, the opposite end of the spectrum.
Yeah, they're
of the
already
world that
successful.
They're already successful. So
There's nothing in Entourage that even suggests that it would know what to do with the answering machine sequence, which
No.
I just,
Yeah.
I mean, there were moans in my
Oh,
screening.
yeah, me
People
too.
just couldn't bear it.
Yeah.
And so, for those of you who may not have seen Swingers, why are you listening to this?
yeah, that's weird.
Press pause,
Yeah.
go watch it. It's on DVD. We'll wait.
Then come back.
You're back now. Yeah, it's a film about desperation, but not despair. It's about, it's kind of, well, I'm jumping around in my head now, but it's sort of a spiritual cousin to Magic Mike 2, in that it's about outrunning the misery that you have waiting for you at home. Like
That's-
the loneliness and the sadness that you won't admit to anybody, even your best friend. And the way that, ultimately, it's about showing us that Mikey, for all of his ineptitude and self-doubt and neurosis, he's going to be okay, because it's about learning to transcend the Trent.
That's what it's
in all
about
of
for
us.
me. It's about that learning to transcend, which is in itself like kind of a coming of age, or growing up, you know? And I always think of it as, when I think of it from screenwriting terms, that it's the journey from not being completely obsessed with the pain that you feel over your broken heart.
Yeah.
It's the journey from praying for that phone to ring for her to call, to her calling and you not wanting to answer it. Basically,
Yeah.
It's that journey, and which to me is like microcosmic, but also it's just it's grandiose. It's this wonderful coming of age, and anyone who's experienced heartbreak, who's been been dumped, or who's been left or cheated on or whatever, knows that pain and knows the journey of. And I think when I saw it, I might have been in the same. I'm trying to, and now this is coming back to me. I think when I first saw it, I was in the pain part where I was still hurting from the breakup. From my heart was still broken.
Oh God! So
and
you're
seeing
totally
him,
receptive.
yeah. And I think now that I'm putting it all together, seeing him recover and find that little confidence at the end that helps him, that kind of saves his life, was profoundly impactful on me.
Yeah. So when did you see it? What was your first experience of it? Theatrical, video?
Yeah, theatrical. I was living I'm born and raised in Winnipeg. I was still in Winnipeg. I hadn't moved to Toronto yet. And I was living in an apartment in the artsy village, and I was a part-time actor. I was running a grocery shopping service to pay the bills, but then I was acting in little day player parts in film and TV, and just really thinking about making a move to LA or Toronto, and really trying to figure all that out, and starting to write stuff in my spare time. And I saw it at the Grand Park Cinema in Winnipeg, which is like my old neighborhood theater that I grew up watching movies in.
Okay.
But I had been warned about it because my friends had seen it at TIFF and had said, you're gonna love this movie. And my experience of watching it was all this stuff, but also it was in the details. Everything these guys did, I was doing. From playing that Nintendo ice hockey game and like trying to make the heads bleed, to the way they played golf, which was like they weren't golfers, they were just on the course, and they'd get to the green and they'd be like, okay, well, let's count up. What do you 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and no, I'm gonna go with 10. I'll go with 8. You're gonna 8. You're gonna do 8. I'll do 8. We golfed that way. Like everything in it matched what we were doing. What my friends and I were doing, and then the way they talk, we had our own language with our own quirky, evolved ways of speaking, and they had that in the movie, and theirs was so energetic and fresh and funny and odd, and we thought, oh, now we can we'll just write a movie. We were those guys. We were like, let's write, and we did. We wrote one. It's terrible. We were like, we'll just use the way we talk in our language, and. Yeah, that didn't work, and that also, but that experience then of not being able to emulate what they did was also, as a was in my early 20s, was also really eye opening and inspiring. Oh, so it's not that easy. Yeah, you can't just write your own experience and talk the way you and your friends talk, and it doesn't naturally come across as charming and funny. You have to actually put some work into your craft. Yeah. So I was in Winnipeg, and it really did help inspire me to make the move to Toronto, which was obviously a huge career move for me.
Sure. And hugely intimidating, I would think.
Hugely intimidating, yeah.
Also to just be confronted with a movie that, I there's a handful of films where I've sat through them and thought, oh, this movie was made for me. Like, I don't know how they did that, because I should do that. Like, that should be coming out of my brain, instead of plugging into it.
That's exactly how I felt like they made this movie for me. Yeah. For me and my 3 buddies.
And when that reaches you at a certain point, like it's partially about what the movie is, it's partially about who you are in that moment. But that feels so great. It feels so... Like, I got it with Trainspotting, where I have never been a Scottish heroin addict.
Right, you haven't?
No, it's weird.
Oh, I have.
I missed that window.
Yeah, you got it. Time. It's not too late. Get out there, man.
But it's one of those things where you just come out of it going, I don't know why that is my life, because it's not.
Right, but it felt like...
The energy was right, and the music was like all these songs I'd never heard properly before.
Right.
I knew them, but I hadn't... It's the contextualization of everything in that moment where you just walk out bouncing.
Yeah.
The movie got me, rather than the other way around. Like, when you actually have that, you can create that illusion in your mind. It's like, oh, that movie gets me. It's like, no, you got the movie. That's what that is. But in that second, when it's over and you're just left vibrating with this incredible sense of having been where you should be, artistically, somehow, that's so great, and it almost never happens. And it's so wonderful. Like, another one, I think maybe it was just the mid-90s for me, but like Out of Sight is another one.
Yes.
I was talking about with Chris Smets, where it's just like, this is how this should be. This is what this movie needs to be.
But there's a distinction. I'm with you. There's a distinction there between feeling that way about the craft of the movie, which I had when I watched Trainspotting. I had it when I saw Out of Sight. I had it at Pulp Fiction, where I just sat there with my jaw open.
Like an aesthetic perfection.
Aesthetically, this movie was it fits right into my slot. Like, it's exact. With Swingers, it was a different experience, because it was that. In addition to that, it happens to be about a person or people and a world that I feel like is my world.
Right.
So, like, Pulp Fiction, yes, amazing, resonated for me in a way I hadn't experienced, but I didn't understand the world or the characters. It wasn't like I related to the you know what I mean, the voice of it.
So this one is also relevant to who you are.
That's the thing. So Breakfast Club was the only other one I can think of where at the age when I saw it, I felt like this movie, not only does it fit exactly in my aesthetic little cubby, but I feel like it's about me. It's about my experience of high school.
Right.
You know, for me, I'm sure you could guess I was the Anthony Michael Hall character.
I think we all were. Yeah.
Well, I guess you and I were the film geeks were, but I don't know, does everybody? I mean, it was
anybody who talks about The Breakfast Club for any length of time is going to identify with either
I guess so.
Hall or Sheedy, depending.
Yeah, the two.
Because that's who we see ourselves are. But
yeah, the rebels don't go like, man, when I saw Breakfast Club, I was like, that's Judd Nelson is me. No, by the nature of that, then you're not watching Breakfast Club, and you're certainly not talking about it 40 years later.
Yeah, well, these are the guys who make Entourage.
Right,
like they're the guys who come out of Swingers and go, oh, you know what we should do?
We should do, yeah. What about us?
So Chandler Levac did a live reading of the Entourage script with women. Like her first feminist live read was a gender swapped Entourage reading
of an episode or
the pilot. And she read the script notes and like, these guys have absolutely no sense of irony or self-awareness. It's just like I think the last line is as they board the jet. It's like no security guards for our boys, and it's just like, are you kidding me? This is not how you see the world. But then of course Entourage becomes this weird aspirational thing. Where you see it because you want to be with those guys and you imagine what parties would be like in like non-stop yacht time. But you see Swingers and you're just so glad you're not them.
Exactly.
But in a good way, like in a positive way. You know, their suffering is our education.
Exactly.
You can be empathetic towards Mikey, maybe not so much for Trent, but
Trent too a little bit though. That's kind of what that's why it works so well.
Yeah.
Is that maybe, you know, it's different with Trent, because with Trent there's also that you feel like you're seeing him in an ironic way. Like you're seeing him in a way that's kind of up and out. You're watching him through the eyes of Mikey a little bit.
Yeah.
But you're also drawn to him and his charisma in a way that you're conflicted by. You're like, this guy's, there's something, I want to hang out with that guy even though he's a train wreck. And, you know.
Yeah, he is the most entertaining guy in the room. Like the casting of Vince Vaughn is at least as important to the film's success as Favreau having written and starring in it. It's
in tandem. They're equally important.
Yeah. Like there was a point. People don't believe me when I tell them now. You were there. You remember. But there was a point where Vince Vaughn could have done anything. Like he played a serial killer. He played
right after that.
Yeah,
like for his next few choices,
he was all over the place. He was a utility guy. And he was good in all of them. Like he's The Lost World. I don't know why people don't like it now,
right? Or why they like him in it. Yeah. I mean, I don't love the movie, but he's great.
It's a beautifully cast film. Like Julianne Moore, people forget Julianne Moore's in that. I mean, she's great in it too.
True, yeah.
The Hitchcockian damn distress sequence. Yeah. It's just a movie that no one remembers because the last 20 minutes is so not a Jurassic Park movie that it takes you out of it.
Right.
But there was a time where Vince Vaughn was not just the guy who talked fast.
Yeah.
And if you look at Swingers, you can see that because he's layering the performance just enough that there is more going on. Like Trent is trying to outrun his own mouth.
Yeah.
But it's not a positive. Like it's not the positive trait that it would become in all of Vaughn's other stuff.
Yeah.
Where like movies like Fred Claus or Wedding Crashers, where this guy can handle any situation and just talk people into doing what he wants. It's like, but he's trying to talk women into bed in this movie. That's all he's doing because that's all he wants to do, and
it's tragic.
We see its limits. Yeah, exactly.
It's tragic. And when you look at that very last scene when they're in the booth, and he thinks that the girl is giving him the eyes.
Yeah, he creates an entire relationship.
Yeah, and it's just great. Another classic Trent moment, and you're right with him, and Favreau's kind of going along with it, and then the turn. That's how the movie ends, right? It's that turn. It's not about Mikey. The last beat is about Trent having that turn, and the vulnerability in that. It's really quick, and the movie's over. Yeah. When he realizes what's happening and that she's not making eyes of him at all, she's making eyes of the baby, and he turns back to Favreau and he's like, "So what were you? What was I?" And he stammers. He can't even find the words.
Yeah.
He actually, the last line that Vince Vaughn has in that movie, he doesn't have it. He's inarticulate. He's not saying anything.
Yeah, he runs out.
And that's the humbling of Trent in that moment, right? Which is like, it's just this tiny little beat. It just got me. It's so perfect, and it's really where you go, okay, now this guy is going to be able to do anything. But I kind of felt like those movies he made afterwards. You're right, he's good in everything because he's just charisma personified. I kind of feel like he was also testing the waters. Like, I now have this rare opportunity where I can do whatever I want. Was it Clay Pigeons?
Yeah.
And there was a Psycho remake. I mean, there was a few.
Psycho remake, also with Julianne Moore, so underrated.
There's a few things in there where we love him, and Vince is great in all those roles, but I also felt like he's figuring out how far can I can I go outside that faster? How far will they let me go?
Right.
Because he was not well received in those roles. Like, you and I appreciate him because we love him, but the reviews were not kind, really. And
make more swingers. Like, they were just...
Go back to which is when he got back into sort of the Will Ferrell world and started doing just, okay, I'll do the fast-talking, wisecracking, lovable best friend, funny guy.
And he's tried to get out of it again with, like, the second season of True Detective and all that stuff where he's...
And that Starbuck remake.
That's right, Delivery Man.
Yeah.
Where he's pushing against it and letting someone else be funny.
Yeah.
And I'm, like, the comedies haven't burned me out on him. I still want to see him work it and try to do new things. And I think as he gets older, he's going to age into something interesting.
Yeah.
Or rather that people will see that he's interesting again, that it'll come back around. But it must be incredibly frustrating 20 years later to just get stuck in movies. I mean, he was producing them. It's not like he was like a prisoner of his own type,
he was choosing them.
But it did feel weird, like stuff like Fred Claus and Four Christmases. Like every year there would be another bad Vince Vaughn comedy.
The Breakup, was that one?
Oh, The Breakup, yeah. And I think back to stuff like, Return to Paradise, the one, the Thai prison movie.
Yes.
For lack of a better term. There was that and Broke Down Palace that came out right around the same time, and they felt like mirror images of each other, and neither of them is exactly good, but they're still acting in it, and there is so much of Vince Vaughn's potential in Swingers that we have yet to see realized. And with Favreau, he almost rejected acting after a certain point and plunged into filmmaking.
Totally. He absolutely, I mean, I don't mean this negatively, but he peaked. Acting-wise, he peaked with Swingers.
I think so, yeah.
I enjoy him every time I see him on camera, but I also get this feeling that he wants to be doing other things.
Yeah.
Which is interesting because, when he created the film and when he volleyed himself in to try to direct it and really lobbied to direct it, I mean, he wanted to be a director.
Oh yeah. And it is like totally a writer's movie. It's bizarre way. Not that Doug Liman doesn't give it life.
No, of course he does.
But it is scenes of people talking and scenes of people talking and scenes of people hurting and scenes of people talking.
Yeah.
It is very much a film where you pay attention to what's going on emotionally and you enjoy the dialogue for, the rhythms of it are great, but it's not, no one comes out of Swingers and thinks that's a fantastic piece of cinema. It's good. Like, it's an enjoyable watch movie.
Yeah. There's moments in now where, because now that I understand, at the time I was young, I didn't really know I didn't really know what to chalk up to the director and what to the writer.
Right.
Now when I watch it, I there are moments where I think, there is a really deft director hand. I'll tell you when it is.
Please.
There's a few of these film references throughout that we all tried to do at that time. It was these heavy. It becomes very heavy-handed. Yeah. There's the slow-mo shot of them closing the doors and walking, which is like was the slow-mo from, I guess, Reservoir Dogs.
Yeah, I think so.
And then putting on their sunglasses. They're all cool, and it plays perfectly, and I'm watching like, why is this working? Why does this not like roll eye-rollingly? And then there's one where they're talking about the track. They have a conversation with the tracking shot in Goodfellas,
right? Which is itself.
And then they replicate it when they're walking into the back of the club, and instead of rolling their eyes and going, oh, here they go, they're doing what we hate. It just there's an affection.
Yeah,
there's an affectionate sort of wink. And it just plays beautifully.
Yeah,
and I think that's a director.
I think based on the vibe the film sets up, I would credit Liman with that. I mean, easily. Like, he's the one who's steering it into a kind of a polished, professional. I suspect it would be a lot more ramshackle, just given what he did with Go as well.
Grittier and
Subsequently, he makes it glossy. He makes it feel like it isn't a cheap film. He makes a value of everything that he has on hand, including camera work and music, and just the lighting is gorgeous in some scenes, though, and it doesn't need to be. There's no the pancakes during the Renaissance sequence has the beautiful lighting, not of a Vegas fluorescent room, but it actually looks like a space you'd want to be in.
Yeah,
like a little oasis almost. From the neon, but it also fully captures that just he knows enough to frame the rejoinder to that, which is Voltaire, hold on, that great little throwaway line that the waitress has, where she has her moment where it's not straight on, it's not a boring shot, it's just an interesting little fillip in a way, a flourish at the end of that scene. That
that's
shows
a
us
great
that,
touch.
everyone gets their dignity, everyone has attention paid to them.
Yeah.
And when a joke bombs, it's a bomb within the movie rather than a bomb in the movie. Like, we're allowed to know, and this is something that I've talked about before on the show, I'm sure, but one of my favorite things in the world is watching a movie that knows it's okay for the movie to depict someone making a mistake and not judge them for it,
right,
but also to let us know that the movie knows that this is a mistake. And that's part of that is the direction, part of that is the script. Certainly in the scene in the answering machine sequence, which is the single most, and this was in a decade that had Benny's Video and Reservoir Dogs and there are 4 Haneke movies I think made in the 90s, but they're all excruciating. The ear torture sequence in Reservoir Dogs, but the scene of Mikey just looking at the phone and picking it up again over and over and over again is possibly the most uncomfortable I have been in a movie theater.
I would say so. Yeah.
And certainly in the 90s, in that decade. Maybe Man Bites Dog, but just...
And unlike the Reservoir Dogs
painful.
ear cutting scene, which is also obviously, gut wrenching, it's nothing to do with, it's not about a visual gag, it's not about horror. I mean, not about physical horror. It is about horror, but it's a different kind of horror.
Well, it's self-inflicted. Like, that's it. He is choosing to do this. And he can't stop. I mean, he's compelled to do it. Mm-hmm. But it's just so, like, that is the perfect combination of a filmmaker, a writer, an actor, like, just knowing exactly how to present this. Because you could screw that scene up so many different ways. Or you could play it for laughs, and it kind of does. It
played for laughs when I saw it, but it was uncomfortable laughter. Right?
Yeah, I just felt so queasy.
Yeah.
By the end of it, I think I was on the verge of an aneurysm.
But it's also that fine art of knowing how far you can go with it.
Yeah, and
then just when you think it's gone for over the line, it keeps going, and that somehow redeems it. It's like that.
It's the rake gag.
It's the rake gag. Yeah. It's the rake gag. Exactly. Yeah. It
just goes around to being funny again.
Yeah. Comes back around.
Like, I'm just, as we're talking about it, I don't know if the listener can tell how clenched I am at this point.
You are. You're very uncomfortable.
I don't like watching him hurt himself.
Yeah, you could turn a piece of coal into a diamond now.
But it's such a fascinating, like, just that is the scene that would be cut from every mainstream film. Mm. Like, or up until that point, it's the scene that no one thought to include.
Yeah.
And that's why I think Favreau is doing something so weirdly daring by playing that role himself. And I think that's why he needed to write the film. Like, a theater producer once said that a stage play, it was Sergio Corredo, who used to write for The Star, I think, as well, and ran Theater Pass Marais.
He was Pass Marais, yeah.
He said once, and I've always remembered it, that the play needs to tell me why you had to write it.
Right.
Like, that's the thing that a stage play does that film doesn't always do and that television almost never does.
Right.
You need to see the reason.
Right.
And that's...
the personal the reason.
Why did Jon Favreau write this movie? I think you can answer that.
It's so evident.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so evident. And see, that's really why for me it had such an effect, as even a notch above Trainspotting, Pulp Fiction, True Romance, Reservoir Dogs, all those movies that punched me in the gut and really, like, because there was something so personal about it, and yet not self-indulgent. Like, it didn't feel like we were being pulled in and forced to watch these, like Entourage sometimes would feel that way. Like, we're being forced to watch these, I didn't feel like I was being forced to watch a world that I didn't want to be welcomed into. But you can definitely see what it was in. And it was so influential for me that the next 3 scripts that I wrote, and probably the first 3 films that I made, were all, and this is just occurring to me now as we talk about it, they're all essentially about a character trying to get over a broken relationship or a heartbreak. Right. And they all essentially have the same ending, which is as a version of the... I'm away from this now. I've moved on. Good. Yeah. But they all have essentially the same ending, where essentially the phone call comes and he doesn't take it. There was no phone calls in mine, but you know what I mean. Right. Yeah. You see the character turning towards a better. Yeah. It's kind of dangerous to be that influenced by a piece of work, like, because now that I don't think anyone would make that comparison, but I can see it now, and I'm gonna have to deal with that on my own. To reconcile that somehow. There was a really weird period of time where somehow movies were inexpensive enough, yet still being shot on film,
And
Right.
you know, like before the digital revolution, there was a window where you got the sense that anybody with $300,000 and one star could make a movie.
Yeah.
And you can see, in Swingers, you can see why that theory works, because sometimes it hits. But
Right.
you also have to endure a whole bunch of other ones that are not that good.
Yeah.
Or good at all. And I think, like, it's really interesting that although Favreau clearly inspired people to make movies, like a whole raft of them, so few of them actually are this. Like, nobody tried to replicate Swingers. You can take the lessons from it. You can take aspects of it.
Not like the way they
stuff
tried to replicate Pulp Fiction or,
Yeah.
or even Trainspotting. There was a bunch of those sort of drug-induced, sort of high-octane.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
there's
there
a whole
wasn't.
stream of them. And there was a movie. There were a couple of films that attempted. It wasn't even the movies themselves, but there were distributors at the time. And the VHS boom, God help us all, that were buying movies that kind of had the same sort of hangout feel and slapping similar art on them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, there was a Noah Baumbach movie that he shot while he was shooting Mr. I want to get this
Kicking
right.
and Screaming?
Yeah. After that, he made a movie. There was a film released called Highball.
I
Which,
never saw it.
He directed it, sort of. It's released under a pseudonym, and it's not. I don't think it reflects his intentions anymore. But it's just a bunch of assembly footage, almost, of people at a party, kind of movie.
Right.
And it was packaged to look like Swingers. It was a matchbook cover art,
Right.
and I think Eric Stoltz is photographed into or photoshopped into a Trent-looking suit that he doesn't wear in the film.
Huh.
But there was this weird attempt to bottle whatever Swingers was, but it was. I don't think anyone ever got it. I don't think anyone ever really understood it. And even when Made was released, it was supposed to be the next Swingers, and it really isn't.
No.
It's a very different film.
I don't think he attempted to. I don't think he was trying to do that. I think he clearly went in a different direction. But it's interesting you say that, because I guess when you look at Swingers and you try to like break it down and deconstruct it and go, well, how can we do this? Like my friends and I tried.
Sure.
There's elements that you can go, well, it's guys that are really tight and they try to pick up girls together and they talk in a unique way and they have catchphrases like "You're so money" and you know, "Vegas baby," and but that's it. Like that's just the, like, again, that's the artifice, right? That's just like the decoration. That's the icing on the cake. That has nothing to do with the mechanics of how it operates underneath, and that would have been impossible to replicate.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to try to make a movie about a bunch of actors, you know, struggling in LA. That just sounds so boring and awful.
There's probably a way to do it. I mean, there's always a way.
Right.
But yeah, it's the only projects that have sort of picked up from Swingers and done anything with it there is an Entourage, which is the dark side, and not understanding it. And then there's the Hangover movies, which were embraced.
Yeah.
But for the same reasons people misunderstood Swingers. Like, the Hangover, the first one anyway, is this really weird kind of subversion of what Entourage is. It's like showing you just how horrible it would be to have this sort of night of debauchery.
Right.
And I've always been amazed at both what happened to the film, the way it was received, and the way that the sequels took it in that direction and just tried to make it more of a party feeling. Because the first one is a nightmare.
Yeah.
And it's absurd and it's weird, and there's a tiger and Mike Tyson, and it just keeps getting odder and more panicked. And Bradley Cooper came through Toronto for Yes Man. And we talked then about how he had just finished shooting The Hangover, and all he could say was, like, he couldn't believe that Warner Brothers was going to throw money at this insane dark comedy that he and two other weirdos had made.
They thought they were making like a kind of a darker Swingers.
Yeah.
Like
and like
After Hours Swingers.
Yeah,
kind of
and
hybrid.
casting Cooper makes sense in that. Because he's equally, like, he could be a Trent. He's slick and fast.
Yeah.
He's capable of it. And certainly that's how the character sees himself. But that's not what the movie is.
Right.
And then by the time the third one comes out, it kind of is. Because it's easier to steer into.
Yeah.
Like, it's easier to go into that skid than it is to try and say, actually, what we were trying to do was this really ugly thing about how white guys are idiots and don't know what they're doing. And this is like an overprivileged upper middle class thing. And all this commentary that just gets thrown away. Because I can picture Favreau and Vaughn hearing about The Hangover and then seeing it and going, oh yeah, I kind of get that, we get that, and then watching what else happens to it. And at the same time, Jon Favreau is making $300 million movie. He basically invents the Marvel Cinematic Universe with Iron Man by accident.
Because Iron Man also was not supposed to be that, or I'm not an expert on this because I'm not interested in that universe, but having seen Iron Man and then hearing a little bit of Jon Favreau talk about it, I think what he's doing with Iron Man is it not sort of a comedy?
Oh, it is. It's very much a comedy. It's as weird and subversive of comic book stuff as it can be. And that's more so than it should be, and that's why it feels so great.
And did that set the tone for the Marvel universe? Because they're not all
they kind of clawed it back very quickly.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, Iron Man and to a lesser extent Ant-Man are the only Marvel movies that work because of who they cast rather than what they're doing.
Was Guardians of the
Galaxy is great, but it's a freak show. I love it, but it's sort of self-contained because James Gunn was allowed to go off and make a weird little space movie because it's not really connected to the other films, and he could be as silly and weird as he wants. And I love that they reached the point where here's $200 million, James Gunn, do whatever you want with our characters as long as you follow these beats. But it's also why Edgar Wright doesn't finish Ant-Man because it stops being what he wants it to be and it becomes something very, very different because of the Marvel Universe restrictions. But the casting of Paul Rudd is genius because you don't have to create a character. You let Paul Rudd be Ant-Man.
Paul Rudd,
the same way Downey is perfect.
Right, for Iron Man.
Perfect for Tony Stark and Iron Man.
Yeah.
And Favreau, having honed his craft as a filmmaker, like with the weirdest series of films. Elf, which is great.
Right.
Delirious, lovely, charming, full-hearted.
Classic Christmas movie.
Yeah, so he goes from writing Swingers to directing Maid to directing Elf.
And after Elf, wasn't it like...
Zathura. Yeah, which is actually one of those movies that, again, he's working with Kristen Stewart, he's working with real actors. Yeah. Josh Hutcherson, I think, was one of the kids. And it's a Jumanji knockoff. Yeah. There's really, it's based on another book from the guy, but it's the same basic structure. You get into this thing that won't stop playing you until it's over. And it's still somehow exciting and interesting, and because I went in dreading it and thinking, why is Jon Favreau's name on this?
But he brought something to it.
Yeah, and it's like, oh, humanity, that's why. There's little moments where people are allowed to feel in the middle of this giant thing that Jumanji never had time for. Jumanji as a concept is, I don't know why people love it. It's one of the cruelest and nastiest children's films.
It's so scary. I was trying to think of what I wanted to show my 6-year-old last weekend.
Can you do that?
And first I was like, oh, Jumanji, that was... And I'm like, no, right. They marketed that as a kid's movie. That is not a kid's movie.
Dead in the first 2 seconds.
It's horrifying.
Yeah. And then you
get space aliens and cowboys.
Oh, Cowboys versus Aliens.
See,
that was after Iron Man.
I actually will confess that I lost interest in him as a filmmaker when I told you I no longer feel obligated to go and see those giant movies. Yeah. Which is very liberating. But I kind of lost interest in him as a filmmaker until Chef.
Right.
Because all of those were coming out, and I hear what you're saying, and I should watch them because I would love to
bother with Cowboys versus Aliens.
But I'd love to see what you're talking about, like the humanity that he would bring to something of that size. And Iron Man, I did admire, even though I'm not a fan of that world. But then when finally Chef, I felt like that was the first real return to not return to form, but return to that kind of a small plot light, character driven movie about heart and relationships and love and friendship and father.
Oh, yeah. I mean, he was really... That's when we finally spoke, and he was really open about that. Like, this is him re-embracing that aesthetic and being able to... He said it as a challenge for himself. Can I make a movie with nothing?
Right.
After 3 straight... I mean, 4 if you count Zathura. 4 straight giant sci-fi movies. But yeah, I mean, that's the weird illusion you create for yourself, right? Like, look at all the favors he pulled. He's got... This is a movie that has the Black Widow and Iron Man just kind of cameoing.
Right.
Because they're pals.
Yeah,
and
why not?
It's also kind of nice to see him do that after, Iron Man 2 and Cowboys and Aliens, where he is really clearly working against the giant machinery required.
Yes.
With the Iron Man stuff, the thing that Favreau accidentally created is the sense that you can cast A-level talent, that it's you're no longer stooping to do these movies. Like Robert Downey Jr., who was starting his comeback. Like Kiss Kiss Bang Bang had already happened. Yeah. People knew what he could do.
Yeah.
And to see him take a superhero movie, maybe even 5 years earlier, would have been like, really? People don't make those. And now he single-handedly legitimizes every other actor who's
That's
ever
really
done it.
Interesting. And that's Favreau doing that.
Yeah, just having the will to do it, to make it happen.
You never would, going back and thinking about Swingers, you never would have imagined that track for him, that he would have gone down that path and done what he's done and go in that direction. It is kind of fascinating.
It really is. Yeah. And that, like people like Gunn's a good example, or like Taika Waititi is doing the next Thor film as the director. Kenneth Branagh did the first one. Patty Jenkins was going to do the second one, then she got fired, and they replaced her with a guy from Game of Thrones, and Taylor. And it's just like there's this constant argument between Ryan Coogler is doing Black Panther.
Right.
Like, we have real filmmakers taking on these corporate machines and bringing a spark of life to them.
Well,
sure.
Isn't that what Christopher Nolan doing Batman? I mean, Christopher Nolan could have done anything after Memento, and was pre-Inception. Was after Inception.
Yeah, no, it was Memento.
Could
and
have
then,
done anything.
Did he go straight to... No, Memento, Insomnia, and Batman
Insomnia,
Begins. Yeah. Insomnia was good.
Yeah, it sure was.
But you have this sense that Jon Favreau is... by making Chef, he's kind of creating this soft landing for himself and getting away from the giant machinery in a way that's more acceptable somehow than how Joss Whedon exited the Avengers project by saying, Ultron, I kind of felt Marvel's thumb on my neck in a few scenes. Like, Favreau, somehow he has avoided blame for Iron Man 2 and Cowboys and the Aliens, and I think he doesn't deserve the blame, because I get the sense that as a storyteller he's just doing his best to work with what's
nobody's
imposed
holding
on
him against those failures. Like, nobody's no one's, it certainly didn't hurt his career at all.
Yeah, and Chef is good. Like, that's the other thing. Like, I've almost been treating it like it's this, like, a fallback position, but that's not fair to him. He did make the movie he wanted to make, and it's weirdly warm and human and sappy in a little bit, and then concentrating on a father-son relationship is the sort of thing he's never really done before, and he's putting himself front and center in a way that maybe another filmmaker might not, simply by virtue of acting in it as well.
Yeah.
But it speaks to a sense of himself knowing what works best. Like, he knows his own best qualities as an actor. Probably, I would guess he's directed himself more than anybody else. Has directed him.
He's in, for
he's
sure.
in the 2 Iron Man movies.
He does little tiny cameos in other people's movies, but he's very rarely anything. And you were saying before you turned the machine on that you were a big fan of Made.
Yeah.
That you thought Made was underrated.
It is underrated. Like, even now, because the only way you can get it is in this 2-for Blu-ray with...
and I should rewatch it, because when I saw it, obviously, I brought in all the expectations of the Swingers. And I remember loving the dynamic. I've only seen it probably just once.
Okay.
Because I didn't love it. But I remember loving the dynamic between them. And that Vince Vaughn went in a different direction with the character. It was quite annoying.
Yeah.
But in a way that I enjoyed, because, he can do no wrong. But I remember feeling that there was something that I was missing, that heart, And I think ultimately in the end of that movie, that despite Jon Favreau being annoyed by Vince Vaughn's terrible decisions, and all that, he does make a choice or give something at the end to, solidarity came first and brotherhood and all that. But I don't know, for some reason it didn't work on me. I should watch it again. Maybe you'll lend me this beautiful Blu-ray.
Sure, I can do that. Made is more of a heist picture in a weird way. Because it's not exactly, but it's kind of like Digstown or...
Right.
There was another film I was thinking of that just flew out of my head, but it's a movie that is like a slow-motion heist picture disguised as a comedy. Yeah. And it's the kind of film that got overlooked really quickly because I think it was dumped in the summer. I remember it didn't open in a perfectly great window.
No, it didn't.
And the hype was built entirely around the Swingers reunion. And it was only a couple of years later, and everybody was really excited. And then as soon as you realize they're delivering something different, there was hostility. Yeah. Which is weird. I mean, it's like people should be allowed to grow and change and screw around with their dynamic.
Yeah, everybody wanted Swingers too.
Yeah. I mean, even if you look at the poster, like the central image was Vaughn yammering and Favreau looking exhausted
with a black
angry
eye.
With a black eye. Yeah, like he's tired of this already. Yeah. Which I thought just was a really nice way of setting up the idea that you're not going to get what you think you want. Yeah. But you are going to get something interesting. And then, nope, just hostility. People didn't want it.
I wasn't hostile about it. It just didn't totally work for me. Wasn't he? Did he also play? He played like a really tough guy. Right?
Yeah, he's a boxer.
He's a boxer. Yeah, he's a tough guy.
Yeah, which is a weird. Because I mean, the other thing too is that Favreau slimmed down very aggressively for Swingers. He's pretty big in the other films you see him in just before. Yeah. And when I saw him in person, he was already starting to get a little bit wider again. Like he clearly couldn't maintain it. His body's just not built for that. Right. And in Made, his bulk works. Like it really. Right. It doesn't feel like, oh, that guy got big. It's, oh, he's huge. Like he's trying to be.
Yeah, he's trying to be
this
huge.
Beefy guy.
Yeah.
He's somebody like, and that speaks to me to this kind of a filmmaker or an actor anyway, in conflict with himself. Like he's not a slender person. He never will be. I never will be. Like, we're just not built for it. I'm not huge or anything, but
you look great.
I'm barrel chested.
You look great, Norm.
Thank you.
Yeah.
But no, there's like, I'm never going to be slender.
Yeah.
And neither is he. And that really spoke to me too. Like the sense that he's punishing himself by dieting and working out and doing whatever it took to be Mikey. And then to let that go and turn it into some other direction like he does in Made, and just use his size as a pro instead of a con. When I went
to LA for the first time after Swingers, I can't remember how long. It was probably 5 or 6 years after Swingers, and I remember going to, as one of the places that I wanted to go on my Swingers tour, I went to the bar where Marty and the piano duo,
right.
Marty and Ellen. I went to that in Las Feliz. I went to that bar with my friend Alan, who lived there, and we were like, "Oh, hey baby, let's go check out the babies." And we were at that bar, and Vince Vaughn was there. Working the bar, like between two, a beautiful woman over here, a beautiful baby over here, and he had his drink, and then he was wearing the jacket, and I almost couldn't bear it. Not because I was like, first I freaked out, oh my God, it's Vince Vaughn.
Sure.
But then there was a sadness to it that he, it's 6 or 7 years after Swingers. And
so this would have been before the Vaughnaissance.
Right before the Vaughnaissance. And
I can't believe I just said that.
The Vaughnaissance. Well, you can coin that. And I just remember feeling kind of sad for him. Not that I'm sure he was enjoying himself and he was having a great time. It kind of felt like, it gave me the impression that he was kind of in the same place.
Yeah. Still Trent.
Yeah, he's still
trapped as Trent.
Still trapped as Trent. He kind of always has been trying to break out of that. That's when we see him do those roles as a serial killer. And, I enjoyed his performance in True Detective, but I did find at times that he was trying to push against something, that there was a menace that he was trying to convey in that show that it was hard for me to buy or to connect with. It was I don't find him physically menacing in that way.
Yeah, which is weird because he's really tall.
He's huge.
And could conceivably be used that way.
And he's an intimidating guy in his own right. Like, he's powerful, right?
Sure.
And he's intimidating. He commands a room. And I think that's what he was doing in True Detective, or that's where he was going. And God love him. Good for him. Like, I hope someday I'm in that position that I can stretch, myself in those ways. So I do love him, though, deeply love him.
Clay Pigeons is due for a rediscovery.
You think so?
I think so. There's a bunch of those Polygram films that just sort of went away because the rights lapsed.
Right, there was nowhere for them to go.
Yeah, someone's got a film. He didn't pick it up. It's got Ginny Garofalo has a gun in it, and Joaquin Phoenix is in it.
Oh yeah,
all
Joaquin.
kinds of stuff you can work with.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. Maybe I'll give that one another watch.
Yeah, I remember it was gorgeous too.
Yeah.
Really beautifully shot.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's one of those things that I haven't seen in probably 18 or 19 years.
Like since it came out.
Maybe since the DVD was released, I think. It was one of the early ones.
Is it in here somewhere?
Oh, I'm sure. It's in a box. They're all here. But yeah, so so we've basically covered the entire history of Swingers and Favreau. So the final question then comes back to something you've already kind of tackled, which is how have you, what of Swingers or what of its DNA has found its way into your work or into your own approach beyond possibly the stuff you've already talked about?
Yeah, certainly it's that blueprint, that simplicity of that arc. I like to really boil it down. Certainly in my writing, there's the writing and then there's my acting. So in the writing, I'm really always looking for that, the redemption of a character, and how simply can you portray it while keeping complexity underneath it. Do you know what I mean? So as I said at the beginning, he's staring at the phone, he can't wait for that phone to ring for her to call, to the end of the arc where she calls and he puts her on hold and forgets about it. There was something so eloquent about that and simple, and yet it was such a much bigger, deeper thing. So I'm always looking for that with the characters. Then there's that notion of the way they talk and the authenticity to that. And I think as an actor, that's where I really keyed into it, and it got me excited about the way that characters talk. And certainly in the films that I've made with Sean Garrity, who you'll be speaking with tomorrow, I believe.
Indeed.
We have found we're very interested in vernacular and when we're shooting and writing and we're shooting, it's all about, does this sound, is this the way that people talk? Is this sound real? We don't want, we hate exposition. We despise artifice in the way characters talk. And when we're shooting, Sean will always, if I flub a line or I stumble over something, as I'm doing it, there's a voice in the back of my head going, oh, that's going to go in the movie. Because he'll always use that that take. He really wants to capture that. There was something about watching Swingers, hearing the way those guys talk, watching the world try to talk like that, like every guy would, threw, beautiful babies into this vernacular, or your money became this catchphrase. And then trying to emulate that as a young writer, and then seeing how that failed, and going, okay, so it's not that easy. There's something special about it, and something skillful. There's an art to that. It's not just about being quirky and unique. Yeah. So that's something, as an actor, I'm trying to find those rhythms and I also really, I think another way it's affected my work was reading about how they got the financing, how they got investors. People were reading that script and going, I don't understand this. They talk weird. Mm-hmm. And then what they had to do was do the staged reading, where they'd go, just come and watch. Let us read it. Let us perform it for you. So when you can see what we mean. So there's something about that proof of concept idea that really excited me. So I've done that on occasion for different reasons, but shown investors or funders, like, no, this is what we mean. Look at this, or, spend a weekend with the video camera and try to capture the essence of what it is we're trying to convey. Because it's hard, not necessarily hard to convey it as a writer, but it's hard to convince, to key into how people are reading it. Yeah. You know what I mean? It's like when you get an email, it's like when you write an email and you think it's obvious that you're being sarcastic.
Oh yeah,
and then the reader reads it and is offended or doesn't understand.
Cold text is a nightmare,
right?
And it's got to be worse with a screenplay, because you're basically asking people to direct the film in their heads. Like, you
a little bit
be able to visually. People, I hate to say this as an absolute, but it seems to be true. People who make decisions with money are generally not the people who can make movies.
Yeah, there's a certain lack of imagination, right? They want to know, what is it going to look like? What's it going to sound like?
What are the two things that I already know that it's going to be like?
Right.
Like, what
exactly.
Is it?
Tell me the two.
Die Hard meets Swingers.
Right.
Like, how do you do that? Oh, right. God, I just invented something.
What did you say? Die Hard meets Caddyshack?
Die Hard meets Swingers. Although Die Hard meets Caddyshack would be awesome.
Interesting too, yeah. Oh, of course. But your job, my job as a screenwriter, my job is to write it in such a way that you don't have to use your imagination. Right. You're going to see, but there's limitations to that, right? And so I think I'm very inspired by the way those guys pulled it off, and really just that you can see that this movie and the story came from their heart. Mm-hmm. They weren't trying. Entourage didn't come from anyone's heart. Yeah. Right? It came from a bunch of other ideas and thoughts and mechanics and Swingers was there's a purity to it. So I go whether it's My Awkward Sexual Adventure, like a big, broad, sexy, raunchy comedy,
which still has two deeply felt performances right in the middle of it.
Thanks. That's.
In fact, Hampshire is playing a character who's very similar to Mikey in that she is completely incapable of enabling herself. Like, she just, like, the whole thing with the taxes is just because she's never finished them.
Yes,
which I find absolutely fascinating and so real. In the middle of this big, ridiculous movie, this this is a person with, like, all of her problems are rooted in a really human failing that I totally get. Like, she and I talked about that when we were supposed to be talking about a different movie once. It's just like, that, like, where did that come from? And she said, I don't know, it was in the script, I just went with it. It's like, yeah, but you really went with it.
Oh yeah, she doesn't even, we could do a whole other podcast about why that was so perfect for her.
Just a weird intuitive
and how
thing.
her personality, how that fit nicely into certain elements of her personality. But I won't dig deep into that. But so whether it's that kind of movie or something darker, like Borealis, something more a little more challenging, a little more emotional, I'm always looking for trying to find the purity of it, and then I end up abandoning. I mean, the ones that I can't find that purity, I'll abandon them. Like, if I've got like a slate of scripts and I'm working on them all, so that becomes a challenge for me, is finding the Swingers' purity in it. Yeah. And then bringing it to life.
And can you do that? Can you actually write multiple projects at once?
I'm writing 6 right now, but they're not. But it's not like I'm writing one and then I hit enter. Okay, then save on that, and then it's like for 2 weeks I'll work on this one,
Okay.
and then I'll put it over here and I'll work on this one. One of the projects that I tell you you'd be interested is the Phil Hartman biopic.
Oh, you're working.
So I've been hired to write based on my awkward sexual adventure. I got the job because
that actually makes a kind of sense.
Does it? Because I didn't get it, but it was like a comedy
tension
with this sort of heart, that they liked from that and tension. So I'm writing. It's an authorized Phil Hartman. We have the life rights. We have the estate. I'm talking to Phil's daughter.
Wow.
Regularly.
God, the responsibility involved in that.
It's turned into this giant thing that is really overwhelming and emotional and crazy. And but so even something like that, bringing a true life story to the screen and having to dramatize elements of it, gotta go back to the purity, man. Find the realness in it and find the heart, find the beating heart. And I feel like if I can do that every time, then I'm gonna reach people. Maybe not everybody, but at least some people.
Yeah. Well, the people who got Swingers really got it.
They
that's
really
a good
did.
example. And the people who didn't made Entourage.
I was stunned by how it resonated. Because like I said, when you watch it and you think this is for me, then I'm like, but wait a minute. Millions of people are also feeling that. At first, it's an affront. It's like, no.
Yeah.
This is mine. And you can't all be connecting to it because that means we're all the same. And then you go, we're all the same. That's nice. And that's sort of what defines the things that get into the lexicon or the pop culture, the zeitgeist.
Yeah, no, it's true. Whenever it's the empathy machine, right? When everybody understands something the same way.
Yeah.
So one thing you said has been picking at me, which is that we were both like at the perfect point to see it.
Yeah.
I think we were right at the same age. So how often do you revisit it? Like, is it the kind of thing that has stuck with you? Or?
Yeah. So I did for years, decades. I probably watched it, multiple times a year. And then when the digital revolution happened, my DVD, and I had kids and I had to lose space in my house. My DVDs, unlike you, went in a box and they went into a storage locker. Yeah.
No, my DVDs are basically holding up the wall.
Right. What happens if you pull one out? It's like a Jenga.
It is a little scary.
It's scary. So, so no, I don't revisit it too often. It's the kind of thing where if I'm flipping channels and it's on TV, of course I'm going to watch the whole thing. Or if I see that it's coming up, I'm going to stick around and watch it. But it's not an appointment viewing for me. It's not like something I need to go back. I used to do that. I used to have a much more refined, a smaller DVD collection, and it was those movies that I wanted to watch them, all of them regularly. Right. All the movies we talk about, Out of Sight, Pulp Fiction, Reservoir Dogs, Say Anything, True Romance, Breakfast Club is in there. And now it's not. There's not a need for it. But when I was choosing which movie I wanted to talk about today and looking at my list, even though I'd probably seen some other ones more than this was the one where I was like, I don't need to watch it before we chat. Like it's so there. Like it's so much a part of my my being that I don't need to revisit it to access it.
Yeah, I know what you mean. It's just if the ones we really connect to, they're in our heads. They don't leave.
I mean, I've seen it 100 times.
Sure.
But probably not in a few years. So, and it was nice to think about it and kind of go through it scene by scene.
Yeah. It's kind of weird. Like, I feel like we've really only touched on the
surface.
We've discussed the vibe more than the film itself, but
yeah,
we got that's sort of the point, right? Like that's what you take away.
I guess so.
The feeling of it.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, we did point at particular episodes or scenes and dialogue and things like that.
I can never tell in the conversation. I can never tell how close or far we are from the goal of the film. Right. And I don't feel bad about this one. I think this one went pretty well, but it's one of those moments where, and I'm doing exactly what Mikey does. It's like, did we get everything?
You're analyzing.
Should I call it? Should we start again?
We got. I mean, I can tell you,
I think we did.
As an outsider looking in, we did get to the heart and soul of it. I mean, we kind of, I feel like we did. I feel like I've been able to kind of, I mean, there's some stuff I would have liked to touch on that we didn't get to. Like the dance now at the end, the dancing where you actually physically see his confidence.
That's true.
Come back.
And again, that ties into the whole body issue thing where he's been, like, the film has been hiding this, the gracefulness, the fact that Favreau can do this. And that's something that is striking in its construction because it's got to be in the script. Like, you don't write that scene unless you know you can dance.
Oh, of course.
To put it
you build it or you build around, you reverse engineer from it, right?
Yeah, and to make Mikey so awkward emotionally and hide this grace, because he's great. Like that's movie star dancing. That's great, and it's shot well and it's lit beautifully.
It's perfect. Yeah. It's all perfectly done.
That's the sort of thing that, and I'd forgotten that it is the climax. Like it's the emotional climax of the film.
It's the climax in every way, and it's the I don't know how long it is. We'll say it's 45 seconds of him starting to dance, and he's totally nervous, and he's the Mikey from the beginning of the movie, and then by the end of that dance number, he is the Mikey from the end of the movie, and you watch it happen in an organic, beautiful way. You watch his friends watching it, and then they say, "Where did that come from?" And he's like, "I took some ballroom dancing." You know, it's just sort of very slyly, and it's just this perfect ending. And it also is a lesson in how a climax, compared to the climax of, say, Iron Man, also a great climax. Big explosions, bells and whistles.
Software fighting software, which is my bugaboo with these movies.
Okay, sure.
Yeah.
But this is just the smallest, you know. And we'd be remiss not to mention that this is also the movie where the conversation began around how long do you wait before you'll call your baby.
That's true.
Oh, 6 days. 6 days. 6 days? Yeah. That whole conversation started. That's become a huge part of dating culture, of these kinds of movies, conversations, anything about dating now, whether it's Aziz Ansari's show.
I was just going to say.
Whatever it is.
There's a whole chapter about it in his book.
Modern Romance. And how long do you wait to call your babies? Yeah. That started here. I mean,
that's true.
That began with this. Was the nucleus.
It was an unspoken taboo. No one had ever laid the law down.
Yeah.
But God, when I think about this, an entire generation, maybe now more than that, have grown up internalizing the rules and the behaviors that are shown here as negatives. Yeah, because that's what you're not supposed to listen to Trent. That's the whole point of the other big revelation of the film. Not only is it that Mikey's going to be okay, but it's that Trent was not someone to model yourself on.
Right.
Like Trent is going to be off roofing women for most of the next decade.
Right.
And it's going to be really uncomfortable to have those conversations. And that's why I'm glad they never did a sequel. That's why I'm glad that Made isn't.
We don't want to see where Trent's going to be.
Yeah, I don't want to go to that bar in Los Feliz and find him still there.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, Vaughn's moved on, but I'm pretty sure Trent's still there.
Yeah.
But yeah, for the movie to have that kind of emotional intelligence, like I want that to be a teaching tool. I want people to have to see this in health class.
Right? I mean, it's an interesting thing that you bring up because you're right. So much of it is about is a cautionary tale about how men, treat women, or how men should treat women, or how men should look predatory. That sort of predatory angle, the game.
Yeah, it's not as misogynistic as I remember, which is really refreshing.
Which the movie is
reassuring. Yeah, the game itself is nightmare.
Right. No, but you're right. So the movie actually. That's why you forgive it, is because there is sort of a purity of affection, and amidst all of they're confused. Yeah. Like Trent's spouting this wisdom about, I wait 6 days to call my baby. You wait 6 days? I wait 7. Well, I used to wait 7 days. Now I think that 6 days is money. Yeah, 6 days. They're having these conversations about how to manipulate women, or how. But they're so confused about it, and it's so transparent, and Mikey just sits and watches them and thinks, you guys are idiots. Yeah. You're lovable idiots, though, because you love each other. And then the scene ends with the two boys with their arm around each other, and it's all about, I remember the women in my life didn't love the movie. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm wondering if that's
too real.
Maybe, or maybe because it really is about the love that men have for each other. I'm proposing this as a possible thing. The love that men have for each other will always supersede their need, to partner up with, I don't know.
Yeah.
Mating or whatever, but that heart that beats underneath it is what gives it its charm. What lets them get away with some of that stuff, And ultimately, they were all after the same thing, which is they were all just lonely guys who wanted to have someone next to them, and
it's one of those things where you can reduce it to this sort of. It's not a childish need; it's a primal need to be hugged. Like you need to be close. You need, and there's these two conflicting drives in the film constantly. It's the tribalism of being with your guys, and just I really want someone to understand me. I just need to be loved.
Yes,
and I don't doubt that Trent and Mikey love each other, but it's a love that is pulling them down and keeping them from growing up and transcending the childishness, and yet you can still there's these weird moments where the tribes intersect, where there's this bizarre fight that almost gets people killed, and then in the next scene they're just hanging out
playing hockey with those guys.
With the same guys because, you know,
Yeah.
testosterone flared up and now it's over.
I love that. It was an incredibly offbeat, unexpected moment when he pulls the gun, when Sue pulls the gun on those guys, and you're like, what?
Everybody's horrified. Yeah,
there's a gun in this movie. Where and then you're like, where's? Oh no, is this going to go there? Like, is this going to take us into? And then they joke about it. They go, "What are you doing? Have you not seen Boys in the Hood? Now one of us gets shot."
Yeah.
Right? I'm quoting it like this. I haven't seen it in years.
But that's my point. This stuff just hangs around in your head because it's literally unforgettable. Like, it's just
and then
so
the way
great.
they apologize to each other, because then Vince and they have Vince and not the character Sue, the guy with the gun, and John Favreau's character Mikey. They have this blowout, and Sue calls him a little bitch, and he really lays into him. You're such a pussy, and it hits him right in the gut, and it sends him off. And then they have this apology moment in the doorway when he comes over to his apartment at the end, where they're like, all that's put aside. It's these two men, these two boys wanting to hug each other. Right? So I'm so sorry I said that. Yeah, you know I love you, buddy. Yeah, me too. And I'm like, you don't see that a lot, and it kind of they get away with some of the more misogynistic stuff because there's an emotional maturity to it.
Yeah, it feels like. I mean, it's like it's a bad example because I'm going to use it like it's their armor. Yeah. It's the way they front in front of each other and the way they just puff each other up. And they're inevitably those choices are bad choices.
Yes.
Like every single time someone tries to impress somebody, it's disastrous.
Yeah.
Or it just lands in the room like a lead balloon and people just sort of stand around and wait for it to pass. But what you get out of that is people learning to be their better selves and figuring out who they are, and they're too old to be doing this now. They're too old to be figuring out. You're too old to be figuring out who you are in your 20s. Except that that's not true anymore. That's how the world
when
works.
You do it.
Yeah,
it's a coming of age story, right? In their 20s. Did you watch Man Seeking Woman?
I did.
So I'm thinking now that's a bit of a swingers. You can see
it's about a movie. It's a show about a guy who wants to be in swingers. Like he wants to have that kind of cool. He wants to have that kind of assurance.
Yeah, he's Mikey and he wants to be more Trent. But then you've got the friend. You know, there's a bit of that.
Yeah,
you know, that language
way
in
more
it.
Trent.
Yeah,
but Man Seeking Woman. It's weird because the only way to deal with the kind of issues that swingers brought out is to create a sense of surrealism and not to treat them head on, because if you do that you get something like Love, which is too painful. Yeah, because it's all about the flaws of the characters with very, very little of the redemptive stuff. And I wonder if that's just where we are now culturally. Like we're more ready to watch these lacerations of
there's been enough sort of anti-hero driven, like Louis is doing it too, and that there's an acceptance of it now. It's like you can present that now and not be worried that you're going to alienate an audience. So we can handle it now. Do we want to is the question.
I still like loving characters.
I also enjoy loving characters,
having a rooting interest in people.
Yeah, I had a hard time loving her in Love. You know, I had a hard time.
Gilly Jacobs' character.
Yeah, I had a really hard time. She makes, but then as an artist, I also, that interests me. As you know, if you've seen the work, that it's about, I like creating a character who is very flawed, who makes questionable choices early on in the film, and then working at earning your redemption or your love for them, you know. And I think that's so I also am interested in that journey.
Yeah. Well, I've always liked the idea of being confronted, and I respond to movies that say, "Look at this mess. Keep watching."
Yes. Yeah. See what which is Mikey in Swingers.
Totally.
Look at this mess. Now let's see what happens.
Yeah. And he's going to be okay.
He's going to be okay.
My thanks to Jonas Chernick, whose latest feature, Borealis, just opened theatrically in Ottawa and Vancouver and is available for rental and sale on iTunes Canada right now. If you're in New York, it's opening the Brooklyn Film Fest this Friday, June 3rd. If you're of a mind, you can also look for a couple of Jonas's earlier collaborations with director Sean Garrity, Blood Pressure and My Awkward Sexual Adventure, on iTunes and Netflix Canada. Oh, and while you're looking for stuff, don't forget How to Plan an Orgy in a Small Town, which co-stars Jonas and is also available for rental and sale on iTunes, and features the most friends of this show to date in, ever. You can find Jonas on Twitter at Jonas Chernick, all one word, and you can find Swingers on Blu-ray and DVD from Lionsgate in the US and Entertainment One in Canada. It's also available for rental and purchase on iTunes and Google Play, but pick up the Blu-ray if you can. It's pretty cheap, it looks great, and it's loaded with extra features. You can also get that twofer with Maid that we mentioned. As always, you can find me on Twitter at Norm Wilner and elsewhere on the internet at nowtoronto.com. You can also find this podcast on Twitter at Semcast, S-E-M-Cast, and on the web at someoneelsesmovie.com. If you want to leave a review on iTunes, that would be swell. Let's go with Beautiful Baby as this week's call sign. Thanks for listening.